Hi everyone. Our colleagues in New York asked us to do a reporter's notebook, so on behalf of my team, we were kind of sitting here thinking, where exactly do you begin, right? We've been on the island for roughly 48 hours. So I thought we'd start where it all ended for us. It ends here in Humacao. We just filed our last report for the CBS Evening News. And Humacao is on the southeastern part of the island, and as I look out, I'm reminded that I want to come back here at some point for vacation. That's Las Palmas, the orange roofs and sort of the buildings that are furthest in the distance from where we are, the closest to the water. But I also want to point out how green and lush things are here. It might not seem like a big deal, but I remember after the hurricane, everything was brown, and I mean everything. In fact, it reminded me of covering wildfires in Southern California. Our time here has been productive, exhausting at moments, haven't slept much, and have an incredible team of people. You may have heard me say that. There's no television without the people behind the scenes, right? So what places we went to while we were here: Utuado, Salinas, Jabucoa, Humacao, San Juan, Caguas. In fact, in Caguas, I want to tell you, it was actually our security guard who mentioned that there were people in the area who were helping to direct traffic. Driving around the island, one thing that I noticed 6 months later is that most of the traffic lights are not working. But the people who are directing traffic are locals. They're not police officers, they're not government workers. I'm told that homeless people have stepped in to help, and regular folks who either don't have a job or are in between jobs have put on a reflective vest, grabbed a whistle, and are directing traffic at intersections. We spoke to a man who said he gets paid, tipped regularly by drivers. They roll down the window. We even saw a police officer who stopped at a light and listened to the directions of this gentleman who was directing traffic. I mean, it's sort of just an accepted way of life here on the island, and sort of a sign again of what we've seen over the last 6 months, which is Puerto Ricans depending more on each other than they depend on their government. A lot of people will tell you they have been disappointed by the actions of the government. The government will tell you it was a storm of epic proportions, right? It was a storm that they anticipated, but the infrastructure on the island just could not withstand it. Speaking of infrastructure, it's coming to mind. I don't know if many of you are aware, but the Army Corps of Engineers that's working here on the island, working alongside PREPA, is operating under the Stafford Act. And the Stafford Act actually prevents them from doing any redesigns or upgrades to the grid. So many of you have reached out to me on social media and said, David, is the grid going to be better after the work is done? Is it going to be better than what it was before Maria? And the answer is no, it's going to be the exact same. And here's why. The Stafford Act authorizes the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to bring in brigades and workers to make repairs where they need to be and replacements where necessary, right? So if a pole is not demolished and can be repaired, they just repair it. If the pole is, decimated, then they put a new pole in. But they're not going to redesign that grid in that municipality to be better, stronger, or more resilient, because the Stafford Act doesn't authorize that. Some other highlights for our trip. This trip was actually the first time I got to Utuado. The bridge has been rebuilt, and that bridge is essential. I mean, you had thousands of people in the mountains who were cut off from civilization. One lady told me she was actually unable to get out of her house initially after the storm in Utuado for about 3 weeks. Couldn't even leave her home, not to mention actually get down the mountain to try and cross the bridge. I also wanted to make a point in coming here of not just highlighting the bad stuff. There's a whole lot of good things that are happening. In fact, when we rode around the island, what I was struck by is how everything seemed to be open, and people seemed to be going about their daily life with little interruption. So most people were working. In fact, talk about a big change for us. As we sought out interviews with folks, we were told by many people, oh, they're at work. Oh, they're working. They don't have time for interviews, right? When we were here after the storm, everybody had time because everybody's job was shut down, nothing was working. But we actually had some trouble trying to get folks to talk because they were working. That's a good sign. No more lines to get money at the bank, no more lines to get gas. We went to the smallest areas, actually coming from, we went Salinas, Caguas, down to Ponce, and sort of between, where did we go? What was that gas station? I think it was outside of Ponce. in a very rural area. At any rate, in a very rural area, I stopped by a gas station and they had fuel, no long lines. And those small, really rural stations were the ones who were sort of some of the last to get it, so to speak. We didn't spend much time in San Juan on this trip. In fact, what I did when we started this trip was we were sitting down talking about what stories we wanted to do. And I said, you know, we have such a loyal audience that has followed our reporting since the beginning. Let's reach out to them and see what we should do. And there was actually a college professor who took a look at all of the responses and made a list and said, of the responses back to David Begnaud, people said go to these. And at the top of the list was Humacao, Jabucoa, and Utuado. And we got to all of those places. So I also heard from many of you, don't go to San Juan, things are fine. And so we didn't do much in San Juan because we wanted to make sure we got out into the rural areas where there are more issues, right? Some other highlights. The governor announced actually on the anniversary, the 6-month anniversary of Hurricane Maria, that he was establishing a rainy day fund. And I called his spokeswoman to get more information. And essentially what she told me was this rainy day fund is going to be used to help bring in brigades, electrical brigades faster, right? Because you might remember after the storm, it took so long to get repair crews here. And it not only took time to get crews here, but it took even more time to get the supplies that the crews needed here, right? So they got the men on the island to do the power work, but they needed the poles. And it took weeks, in some cases months. I mean, it was an agonizing period. Speaking about that, I remember interviewing Colonel Kirk of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who spoke quite candidly and said, you know, David, my dad asked me, why don't you guys put the power poles underground? That's how we do it stateside. Why don't you make it safer and more resilient in Puerto Rico? And he said, I told my dad, number one, we can't because we're operating under the Stafford Act. But he said, number two, if we tried to do that all around the island, it could have taken us a year or more to restore power because it would have taken so much time. So anyway, that's kind of everything that's on the top of my head and my heart right now. I'll end with something kind of comical, at least it is to me. So Lin-Manuel Miranda sent out a tweet earlier today saying I was an honorary Puerto Rican. And by the way, somebody asked me the other day, aren't you from Puerto Rico? And I said, not only am I not from Puerto Rico, I had never been to Puerto Rico and I didn't know a Puerto Rican before the hurricane. But at any rate, Lynn sent out a tweet today saying I was an honorary Puerto Rican and thanking CBS for our work. And he said, you know, David, you won't have to pay for, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, pasteles. Did I say it right? Pasteles. Pasteles. You'll appreciate this. Our fixer, who is a local from the island, when I said it the wrong way, he kind of grimaced. But at any rate, I had to respond. I said, I don't even know what that is. But what I do know is that a slice of my heart will always remain in Puerto Rico. We are grateful to the people of Puerto Rico, the Americans who live here, for allowing us to tell their story. And we will continue to tell those stories online, on broadcast, and on social media. I am hell-bent on not letting people forget about what's happening here in Puerto Rico. So thanks for listening. I hope it was worth your time. And I'll see you on social media and on TV, of course.